You wrote a fascinating article, actually. I shared it online in the Sunday Telegraph at the weekend, in which you made it very clear. Well, the headline says it all. No self-respecting country would accept this deal. MPs must vote it down. Is there any hope, do you think, that the Prime Minister, Geoffrey Cox, Stephen Barclay or others will win any concessions that would convince your colleagues, the Eurosceptic colleagues in the House of Commons, to vote for this deal?
Well, in theory, of course they could. They're asking for very little. I mean, they've made enormous concessions already. They've accepted a continuing role for the European Court of Justice after we leave. They've accepted an incredibly kind of asymmetric arbitration mechanism. They've accepted this £39 billion that I don't think any international court really thinks that we owe. The only area where they've dug in is on the backstop, and for a very good reason. You know, EU membership has an exit mechanism, and the backstop doesn't. So we're being asked to replace a temporary relationship with a permanent one, and in exchange for a trade deal that hasn't materialized. So the EU could, of course, say, here's a standard break clause, or here's a time limit, and the rest of the deal, I think, would then go through. But the fact that they are refusing to do that, the fact that they are deliberately making it permanent after these talks with Geoffrey Cox, I think is much more revealing than if they simply hadn't got around to it in the first place, if you see what I mean, because we now can see very clearly what their game is. They want in perpetuity to control our trade, not just with them, but with the rest of the world, even after we've left.
Well, no, I can completely understand the EU's position on this. Michel Barnier's played an absolute blinder. And we know that Martin Selmayr, a very senior figure, Secretary General of the European Commission, said, we have got everything that we wanted from the EU negotiations. I think the people to blame on this are those carrying out the negotiations on our side. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist as a general rule. I'm a cock-up theorist. It's just been absolute ineptitude and hopelessness on the part of our negotiators and our Prime Minister at number 10 in these negotiations. But I am beginning to worry that actually the conspiracy theorists might be right, and that actually we have a Remain Prime Minister, Remain Civil Service, largely Remain a Commons, that actually this has all been a cunning ploy to keep us in the European Union in all but name. And as you put in your article, that actually, just painting shiny gold letters saying this is Brexit on something doesn't make it Brexit, but they're trying to convince us that it is a version of Brexit that's worth having.
I mean, it's much worse than being kept in all but name. If we were being kept in all but name, we'd be no worse off than we are now. This is something far worse because it keeps us in without a vote, without a voice, without a veto. It allows the EU to treat the fifth largest economy in the world as a sort of bargaining chip to benefit its own economy. So it's much, much worse than either staying or leaving. And it's quite extraordinary that we've come to this point. I mean, the whole idea of this withdrawal agreement, the idea of making these concessions, is that they were in exchange for a deep and comprehensive trade agreement. But we've now got so bogged down in the detail of the talks and so determined to come back with anything that can be called a breakthrough that we've lost sight of the fact that the trade deal that was supposed to be the quid pro quo isn't being offered. So we're being asked to hand over the money and accept all these continuing controls by the EU in exchange for the better part of sweet FA, because the whole purpose of the transition period is that it was transitioning to a trade deal which now isn't on the table. How extraordinary that we've got there. Is it cock-up or conspiracy? Do you know, I think it's as simple as this. It's not that we're run by people who are trying to keep us in. They may have wanted to stay in, but I don't think that they're, that they kind of drew the blinds down in a smoke-filled room and said, how do we overturn the referendum result? It's much simpler than that. They never really had any idea of why we were trying to leave. They never had any idea of why people voted leave, other than border control.
And this is where Nick Timothy, the former advisor, and former chief staff to Theresa May, and he said that, she always saw this as a damage limitation exercise rather than an opportunity.
Yes, and therefore defined her success as coming back with something that can be technically called Brexit, even if it patently leaves us in a worse position than either staying or leaving. And that's the real problem.
Well, there are not a lot of people, a lot of voters, a lot of polling suggesting that people are saying, look, just get it over and done with. I mean, whether people voted for Leave or whether they voted for Remain, to say just get it over and done with. And certainly I've spoken to Brexiteer cabinet ministers in the last week who've said to me, look, if you're offered a key to your cell, then and even if that cell, it doesn't lead to the wide open space you're hoping to, you take that key and you use it and you get out, you take what you can. I think that's a pretty rather sort of depressing analogy for Brexit.
What if the door to your cell leads to a smaller, darker, hotter, nastier cell, right? I mean, that I think is an incredibly patronising argument, because it basically says these thickos who voted for Brexit couldn't possibly have had any idea what they were voting for. They couldn't possibly have made any kind of cost-benefit calculation. All they want is something called Brexit. So as long as we call it Brexit, these dim working-class Brexit voters are going to be satisfied. And I just think that is utterly, utterly misreading the mood of the country as a whole, and particularly of the people who voted Leave. People voted Leave as a means to an end. The end is a freer and more global and more prosperous Britain. And we can all accept that there are some kinds of Brexit that are better than others, including some that are worse than not leaving at all, and that is what the government is now putting before the House of Commons.
Well, this is it. If you say it's worse than not leaving at all, and I have to say I am in agreement with you on that, and I've had a lot of people trying to twist my arm, trying to convince me why that's not the case. That look, take the deal on the table, or we're going to face having no Brexit at all. Do you think there is the real option? I mean, there is a lot of hope from Brexiteers that actually the default legal position is actually no deal, and the Prime Minister may not be able to get the votes, which maybe she secretly want to extend. There's no purpose in extending. You can't keep extending, and at that point, then we actually are going to have to face it leaving. A little bit of preparation time extra might not be a bad thing. But actually, do you think that when we're told that the no leaving option, the no Brexit option, isn't really on the table, because there's an element where that cat is out of that bag now? The British people are expecting, whether they voted Leave or Remain, the vast majority of Remainers accept the outcome of the result, and they expect that we do Leave. Do you think that any government, this one or any future government, could get away with not actually delivering that?
No, I mean, I think it's now a question of when rather than if we leave. I think you're right. It is not as simple as saying a majority in the House of Commons has voted to extend Article 50, therefore there will be an extension of Article 50. There's a bunch of other hoops that you need to jump through.
Well, the EU has to agree for a start.
The EU has to agree unanimously. Only one country could veto. So it is far from clear that the choice is between a surrender on these terms and a delay. But even if it is, even if that is the choice, even if we're not for now going to leave without a deal, or let's call it what it really is, which is leaving without the EU's permission, right? That's what leaving without a deal actually means. Even if that isn't now an option given the configuration of Parliament, I don't believe that the plan for a delay, as people are claiming, means that we would never leave. I don't think that's the intention in Brussels. Listening to the people who have proposed it here, I think they genuinely want to replace the interim period, the 21 months of transition of non-voting membership, with something else. What Macron, who really came up with the scheme, basically has said is, okay, Brits, you don't like the backstop, you don't like the implementation period, fine. Why don't you just leave at the end of 2020, which is when our budget round finishes anyway? Then this whole argument about the 39 billion is taken off the table, because you'd be full members during that time, you'd be paying your subs and using the facilities. We go straight from membership to the final deal. We abolish any concept of this implementation or transition period, and that satisfies the businesses who say they want certainty. It gets you comfortably where you want to be before your next election, and it allows us to avoid this uncertainty. So I don't believe that even if Parliament were to vote for an extension of Article 50, that would mean we would never leave. It would mean that instead of leaving on disastrous terms this year, we leave on better terms next year.
Just finally, and very briefly, because time is against us, I must ask you about these car makers, like the BMW with a Mini saying they might have to move production overseas. We've had the Nissan, Toyota, and everyone's saying, look, Brexit uncertainty. Now, no doubt at all for anyone, Brexit uncertainty is a problem. Whether you're a big manufacturer, a little manufacturer, someone who maybe wants to move house or move jobs. However, do you believe that we should be actually paying more attention to these major manufacturers in terms of what does happen?
Well, yes, but paying attention to what is the entire situation, which is not that it's all about Brexit or even mainly about Brexit. There is a real crisis for car manufacturers in Europe generally. There's the whole problem with diesel. There's the problem of slumping demand from China. And I think we should just be honest. No politician wants to say this, but the reality is that 10 years from now, we are going to be building fewer cars in Britain and in Europe generally, almost by any, whatever the EU outcome is. And we need to look at ways in which the people currently working in that industry will transition into the successor industries with better jobs.